The Velthari Empire had never lost a war. In 400 years of expansion across the stars, they had conquered 41 worlds. They had broken species with space travel older than human civilization. They had crushed civilizations that outnumbered them 20 to 1. They had walked onto worlds full of screaming, fighting, desperate species. And every single time, they had walked back off those worlds as owners. They were not cruel about it. High Commander Vrail held that distinction close, the way old soldiers hold old medals. Cruelty was inefficient. The Velthari conquered with math. They measured the target. They applied the correct amount of force. They waited for the species to break. Every species broke. It was not even a question of if. It was only ever a question of how many hours. Vrail sat in his chair aboard the command ship Dominion's Hand and reviewed the intelligence file on the small blue and green planet in the middle of a quiet solar system at the edge of this arm of the galaxy. Earth. The file was thin. That told him everything he needed to know. The humans, that was what they called themselves, humans, were a young species. Their recorded history stretched back 10,000 years, and most of that history was a chaotic, bloody mess of small wars between small tribes that grew into bigger wars between bigger nations. They had only developed basic space travel 70 years ago. They had no faster-than-light technology, no energy weapons, no shielding, no long-range sensors capable of detecting a Velthari fleet at any meaningful distance. Their military forces were split between nearly 200 separate governing bodies that regularly disagreed with each other, competed with each other, and occasionally tried to destroy each other. Divided primitive, brand new. Vrail closed the file. Fleet Commander Dorath, he said. Fleet Commander Dorath stepped forward from the back of the command room. He was young by Velthari standards, only 160 years old, but he had commanded 12 planetary conquest campaigns and won all of them. He was precise, efficient, and hungry, which made him useful. He stood with his hands folded behind his back and waited, because he knew Vrail did not like being interrupted before he finished thinking. "You've reviewed the target," Vrail said. "Yes, sir." "Your assessment?" Dorath did not hesitate. Low-tier conquest. The species has no unified command structure. No single governing body holds authority over all military forces. There are several large military alliances in the Northern Hemisphere, but they are historically competitive with each other and will not coordinate smoothly under pressure. Their weapons technology sits roughly where the Sareth were during our third expansion period. Nuclear capability but no energy weapons, no orbital defense platforms capable of engaging our ships, no FTL interdiction. Their orbital assets are minimal, a crude research station, a network of communication and GPS satellites, and some very old observation equipment. He paused for exactly 1 second. "I estimate full planetary submission within 30 days, 60 at the outside." The resources. Excellent, abundant fresh water, extensive mineral deposits across multiple continents, a breathable atmosphere requiring no modification for Velthari habitation. The agricultural capacity alone makes the planet worth taking. High Command is correct to prioritize it. Vrail nodded slowly. "How many ships?" "I would take 300 to be thorough. We lose nothing by." "Take 200. Vrail's voice was flat, not unkind, just final. "I need the remaining 100 at the Kareth border situation. If 200 ships cannot manage a pre-FTL civilization, then the problem is not the number of ships." Dorath accepted this without expression. "Understood, sir." "One other matter." Vrail turned back to the wide viewport and the dark field of stars beyond it. "There are marker beacons in the outer system of that solar system. Old ones. Our forward scouts found them near the large outer gas giant, the one they call Jupiter. The signals are ancient, several thousand years old at minimum. They do not match any known Velthari, allied, or catalog species technology." Dorath frowned. "Marker beacons." "Placed in a pattern around the inner system, specifically around the inhabited planet. Vrail's voice did not change. I want to know who placed them and why. After you have secured the planet, investigate and report. Of course. It is likely old navigation warning markers. We found similar ones near the third Sarith world. They had been placed by an early spacefaring species charting the system. Likely, Vrail agreed. Doreth left. Vrail stood at the viewport for a long time after the door closed. He pulled the beacon data onto his personal display and studied the placement pattern again. The markers formed a rough sphere around the habitable zone of the solar system, not around a hazard, not around a radiation field or an unstable region, around the planet specifically. He thought about that. Then he closed the display and let it go. Doreth would investigate after. There were 41 conquered worlds in the Empire's history, and not one of them had provided a real surprise. The 42nd would not be different. Fleet Commander Doreth's 200 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the human solar system, on a cold Tuesday in the human month of October. The humans did not know this. Their deepest space monitoring equipment could not have detected the fleet at that range under any circumstances. Their longest-range space probes were old and slow, pushing through the outer dark at speeds that would have been embarrassing for a student pilot in their first year of training. They had ground-based telescopes of impressive size, but the Velthari used passive dampening fields as standard operating procedure on all approach vectors. To any human instrument in any human observatory looking in exactly the right direction, the fleet was simply not there. 200 warships hung in the dark beyond Neptune, and the 8 billion people on the blue planet had no idea. Doreth sat in his command chair on the bridge of the Steadfast Reach and watched his crew run their pre-campaign checks with the practiced ease of people who had done this before. They had all of them. This crew had served with Doreth through 4 campaigns. They were calm. They spoke in low voices. They moved without rushing. There was no particular tension on the bridge because there was no particular reason for tension. This was a job. They were good at the job. Passive survey, full spectrum, Doreth said. I want a complete picture before we move. The survey took just over 4 hours. His science lead, Officer Verath, was a methodical woman who disliked drama and organized her reports in descending order of tactical relevance, which Doreth had always appreciated. She stood at his side and walked him through it without inflection. Population, approximately 8 billion. Concentrated in large urban centers across 6 of the planet's 7 major landmasses. Significant population in every climate zone, including some environments that struck Verath as frankly hostile: extreme cold, extreme heat, high altitude, deep desert. She noted this as a minor curiosity and moved on. Military organization, divided, as the file had indicated. The most powerful military forces were clustered in the Northern Hemisphere. Several large alliances had existed for decades. These alliances had treaties, shared infrastructure, and communication networks. They also had historical tensions with each other that had produced major conflicts within the last century. 2 of the largest powers had pointed nuclear weapons at each other for most of the last 70 years. Nuclear arsenal, large. Enough total yield to sterilize all complex life on the planet multiple times. Delivery systems included ground-based ballistic missiles, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and aircraft-delivered bombs. Range, accuracy, and payload data were all logged. Space assets, minimal. 1 crewed orbital station, approximately 400 satellites of various purposes: communication, navigation, weather observation, military reconnaissance. Some of the military satellites carried crude directed energy weapons, laser systems designed to blind or disable other satellites. None were capable of engaging a Velthari warship. No FTL, no energy shielding, no active sensor grid capable of detecting the fleet at its current position. They have no idea we are here, Verath said, looking up from her display. No, Doreth agreed. They don't. He thought about the standard conquest protocol. Approach orbit. Broadcast a surrender demand in the target species' primary languages. Give 12 hours for a response. If the response was not unconditional surrender, begin selective bombardment of military infrastructure to demonstrate the gap between Velthari capability and the target species' ability to resist. Then wait another 12 hours. Most species did not make it to the second demonstration. The logic of the situation became undeniable once the first cities went dark. It was a clean process. Doreth had always thought of it as merciful, in its way. Better a quick demonstration than a prolonged resistance that cost lives on both sides. Begin approach, he said. Standard insertion trajectory. No active emissions until we are in inner system range. The fleet moved. 3 days later, a man named Dr. Yusuf Akafer saw them. He worked the night shift at a mountaintop observatory in the Chilean Andes, and he was not looking for alien spacecraft. He was tracking a comet he had discovered 14 months earlier and intended to follow until it swung back out past Jupiter's orbit and disappeared into the dark for the next few thousand years. It was a small comet, dim and unspectacular, but it was his in the way discovered things feel like they belong to you, and he kept watch over it with the quiet pleasure of a man tending something he cared about. The fleet crossed the edge of his telescope's field of view while he was adjusting the tracking parameters. He almost missed it. The dampening fields reduced the fleet's visual signature significantly, but not completely, not at close range, and 200 ships moving in tight formation through the inner system at a speed nothing natural should be moving at left a smear at the edge of his frame that did not belong. He stopped adjusting, he looked at the smear, he increased magnification. 200 objects, roughly spherical, with structural features that were clearly not natural, moving in precise, uniform formation on a trajectory that led, without any ambiguity, toward Earth. Yusuf Akafer sat still for approximately 4 seconds. Then he picked up his phone. The information moved the way catastrophic information always moves, slowly, then all at once, then everywhere simultaneously. Yusuf called his department head. The department head called the observatory director. The director called the National Space Agency. The space agency called 4 other space agencies within the hour. Within 6 hours, every major government on Earth had been briefed. Within 12 hours, it was on every news network in the world. Within 15 hours, it had leaked to social media, and no amount of official messaging could contain it. 200 alien ships were approaching Earth. By the time Doreth's fleet reached lunar orbit and settled into position, every human being on the planet with access to a screen knew what was happening. The electromagnetic activity from the planet's surface spiked dramatically on Doreth's passive sensors. A wall of radio signals, most of it noise, fear, information moving at the speed of a species discovering it was not alone and not safe. Doreth observed this and nodded to himself. Good, they knew. A species that knew what was coming made better decisions. Fear focused the mind. When the governing bodies did the math, 200 warships versus their own capabilities, the rational voices would win out over the proud ones. The surrender would come in before the 12-hour deadline. It almost always did. He gave the order to broadcast. The Velthari translation systems had been built from decades of captured human radio and television transmissions. The humans had been broadcasting their languages, their music, their arguments, their history, and their entertainment into space since the early 20th century, which Doreth's analysts described as either an extraordinary gift or an extraordinary oversight depending on who you asked. The AI had built a working translation matrix for 42 human languages and verified it against intercepted military communications captured in the last week. The message was simple. It had been simple for every conquest campaign Doreth had ever run. It said, "People of Earth, your world has been selected for incorporation into the Velthari Empire. Resistance is not advised. The military capability of your species is not sufficient to oppose us. Surrender your military forces and governing structures within 12 hours of this broadcast, and the transition will be conducted peacefully. Your people will be recognized as subjects of the Empire, with all protections and obligations that status carries. Refusal to comply will result in military action against your infrastructure. You have 12 hours to respond. It was broadcast on every human radio frequency simultaneously, in 42 languages, from repeating transmitters on all 200 ships. Doreth leaned back in his chair and waited. 3 hours passed, 6, 9. His communications officer turned from her console. Her expression was professionally neutral, but something in the angle of her head was slightly off. "Commander, we have a response." "Put it on screen." The response had been broadcast from hundreds of separate transmitters across the planet's surface simultaneously. In every human language the translation matrix had cataloged, and some it had not fully processed yet. The AI compiled the signals and rendered a single unified text on the main display. Doreth read it. He read it again. 3 words. "Come and try." He sat with those 3 words in a silence that stretched for a long, strange moment. To his left, his first officer made a small sound that Doreth elected not to identify. On the display, 3 words sat perfectly still and did not elaborate, did not apologize, did not ask for anything, did not threaten in specific terms. Just 3 words, flat, direct, almost bored. "Come and try." Doreth had collected 12 surrender responses in 12 campaigns. He had received desperate pleading from species that knew they could not fight. He had received defiant declarations from species that believed, wrongly, that they could. He had received silence once, from a species so fractured by internal conflict that no one could agree on a reply. He had never received exactly this. 3 words that did not bother explaining themselves. 3 words that sounded less like a declaration of war, and more like someone holding a door open. He thought briefly about the marker beacons in the outer system. He pushed the thought aside. "Begin bombardment sequence," he said. "Military targets only. Northern continent primary military installations. We'll give them a demonstration and wait for the second response." His crew moved to their stations. Outside the viewport, the blue planet turned slowly in the dark. Below, something was already moving that Doreth had no data on, no category for, and no warning about. He did not know this yet. He would. The first strike was surgical. Doreth had ordered it that way deliberately. The goal was not destruction. The goal was demonstration. He wanted the humans to see the gap between what they had and what they were facing, and he wanted them to see it clearly, without confusion, so that the rational among them would understand the calculation immediately. His ships targeted military airfields, radar installations, command centers, and naval ports. They did not target cities. They did not target civilian infrastructure. The weapons they used were precise, kinetic impactors and low-yield energy pulses designed to destroy specific structures without flattening the surrounding area. The entire strike took 11 minutes. When it was done, Doreth reviewed the results. 42 military installations across 3 continents had been hit. All 42 were confirmed destroyed. Collateral damage was minimal. The message was clear. The Velthari could reach any point on the planet's surface from orbit, at any time, with accuracy the humans could not match, using weapons the humans could not stop. He broadcast a second message. "This is a demonstration of our capability. Your military infrastructure can be eliminated from orbit. Further resistance will result in the targeting of population centers. We ask again for your surrender. You have 12 hours. He sat back and waited for the second response. It came in 4 hours, not from one government, from all of them. The AI rendered it on his display, compiled from hundreds of simultaneous transmissions. We are still here. Come down and fight us properly. Doreth stared at the screen. His first officer, Commander Seville, appeared at his shoulder. Seville was steady, experienced, and not easily surprised. He was looking at the display with an expression that Doreth had not seen on his face in 4 campaigns together, something that was not quite worry but was standing right next to it. "That is not a rational response," Seville said quietly. "No," Doreth agreed, "it is not." He thought for a moment. Then he made a decision that he believed was the correct one and that he would later, in the privacy of his own thoughts, acknowledge was a mistake. "We land troops," he said. 3 sites, 2 in the northern hemisphere, 1 in the south. Urban centers, I want them to see soldiers, not just fire from orbit. Physical presence is what makes a conquest real to most species. They need to feel it to believe it." Seville said nothing. He was not the type to argue in front of the crew. "Prepare the landing contingents," Doreth said. 12,000 troops per site, full armor and equipment. We move at first light local time. The Velthari landing craft came down in 3 cities simultaneously. A major city on the eastern coast of North America, a large city in Central Europe, and a metropolitan center in East Asia. They came down in open spaces, parks, airfields, large public squares. Doreth had read enough human history to know that landing in the middle of a built-up urban area was tactically messy and unnecessary. Better to land at the edge and advance inward. Cleaner, more organized. The humans would see the scale of the force and the logic would do its work. The Velthari soldiers who stepped out of the landing craft were large, taller than humans by a significant margin, armored in layered composite plating that could stop anything in the human conventional arsenal, carrying energy weapons that were simply on a different level from anything the humans had. They moved in tight, professional formations, squads covering squads, advancing into the streets with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who had done urban operations on a dozen different worlds. For the first 30 minutes, it went exactly as Doreth's models said it would. Human civilians fled. The streets emptied ahead of the advancing formations. There was scattered small arms fire from a few positions, which the Velthari armor shrugged off without casualties, and those positions were destroyed quickly. The local military forces in the initial landing zones had been reduced by the orbital strikes and were caught badly off guard by the speed and direction of the advance. 30 minutes, everything going according to projection. Then it stopped going according to projection. The first thing that changed was that the human civilians stopped fleeing. It was not instantaneous. It happened in pieces in different places, and the pattern took time to become clear. A group of people who had been running would stop, look at each other, look at the soldiers, look at the streets around them, and then instead of continuing to run, they would go somewhere specific, not away, into buildings, down into basements and cellars and underground parking structures, into the city's infrastructure, into the spaces below the streets, where Velthari sensor equipment had reduced effectiveness because of the density of the material above. The second thing that changed was the resistance. It did not come from organized military formations holding defensive lines. It came from everywhere and nothing. A squad advancing down a wide commercial street took fire from 3 separate upper-floor positions simultaneously. By the time they identified and neutralized all 3 positions, a 4th had opened up from a direction they had already cleared. The shooters were not soldiers in uniform, or not entirely. Some were not. Some were men and women in ordinary civilian clothing, carrying military weapons, and fighting from positions that military planning would never have designated. The third thing that changed was the terrain. Every building became a problem. Every intersection was potentially controlled. The Velthari had excellent sensor equipment, but the cities were dense and deep and full of signal-scattering material, and the humans seemed to understand this intuitively, moving through the urban space in ways that kept them in the sensor shadows. A squad that entered a large department store to clear it came out the other end without their point element. 3 soldiers simply gone, somewhere in the interior, and nobody had heard energy weapon discharge. What had killed them, and how, was not clear from the remote data. Doreth received the first field reports 3 hours into the ground operation, and felt the first genuine unease of the campaign. Not catastrophic, not yet, but wrong. The shape of it was wrong. He pulled up the casualty numbers. 11 Velthari soldiers dead, 43 wounded, across 3 sites against a species with no energy weapons and no information about Velthari armor specifications. 11 dead in 3 hours of what was supposed to be a demonstration exercise. He called his ground commanders for a direct report. Ground Commander Tesseth, leading the North American site, was a veteran of 6 campaigns. He was calm on the line, but something in his packing was deliberate in a way Doreth recognized as the careful voice of a person choosing their words. "They fight differently from anything in the database," Tesseth said. "We expected organized resistance from military formations or panicked civilian flight. We got neither. They are dispersed. They are mixing civilian and military personnel freely, and they are using the city itself as a weapon. Every building is a defensive position. Every underground system is a supply and movement route. They are not trying to stop our advance in the open. They are pulling us into the close ground where our range advantage doesn't function." "Are they being directed from a central command?" A pause. "I can't confirm centralized command. The individual units communicate and coordinate, but I can't find a unified structure. It is possible each local group is making independent decisions that look like coordination because they have similar training." "Similar training," Doreth repeated. "These are not all professional soldiers." "No, Commander. Many are civilians with weapons, but they are fighting like soldiers." Doreth ended the call and sat with this information. The European site reported similarly. The Asian site reported that 3 blocks near the landing zone had been completely recaptured by human forces using a combination of underground movement, rooftop fire, and what the site commander described as improvised explosive devices of significant yield placed inside the road surface itself. The Velthari armor could withstand direct small arms fire, but a large enough explosion directly underneath a soldier was a different category of problem. They were mining the roads, not with sophisticated military hardware, with homemade devices built from whatever was available, positioned based on a clear understanding of where the Velthari would have to walk. Doreth thought about this for a long time. He had a very complete tactical picture of how the operation was going. He did not yet have a conceptual picture of what he was dealing with. He called for a full intelligence review. He wanted everything available on human military history. What his analysts brought back over the next 8 hours was not reassuring. The humans had been fighting each other for 10,000 years. Not metaphorically, literally, continuously in documented and undocumented form, across every continent on the planet, in every possible terrain type, in every possible climate, at every possible scale from individual combat to engagements involving millions of soldiers across thousands of kilometers. They had fought in jungles and deserts and mountains and frozen tundra and open ocean and underground tunnels. They had developed strategies and tactics for every conceivable environment. They had written entire libraries about the theory of war, centuries of accumulated thinking about how to fight, when to fight, where to fight, and crucially, how to fight when outmatched. That last category was extensive. Humans had a specific, well-developed military tradition around fighting enemies with superior technology, numbers, or position. They called it different things in different languages: guerrilla warfare, asymmetric warfare, insurgency. The core idea was always the same. When you cannot match the enemy in the open, you change the terms of the fight. You pull the enemy into terrain that neutralizes their advantages. You refuse to stand still long enough to be destroyed. You make every step the enemy takes cost something. You accept losses and you do not stop. Dorath read this and felt something cold move through his chest. The 11 dead, the improvised explosives in the road, the civilians fighting alongside soldiers without any clear delineation of who was which, the sensor shadow movement through underground infrastructure. The way the resistance was getting stronger as the hours passed rather than weaker. It was not random. It was not panic. It was a species that had been practicing this specific type of warfare for thousands of years, doing it automatically, without being told, because it was in the bones of their military culture. He sent an urgent communication to High Commander Vrail. Sir, the ground operation is proceeding, but with complications that were not anticipated by our initial intelligence assessment. Human resistance is not breaking down as projected. They are employing dispersed urban combat tactics with a high degree of effectiveness. Casualty numbers are within acceptable parameters but trending upward. I am requesting additional guidance on rules of engagement regarding civilian combatants, as the distinction between civilian and military personnel appears to be effectively non-existent in the human response. I am also requesting a review of our intelligence basis for this operation. He sent it and waited. Then he went back to the casualty reports. 37 dead now. The number had gone up while he was writing the message. He thought about the 3 words they had sent back. Come and try. At the time he had read it as defiance, the kind of bravado that frightened species sometimes use to mask their fear. He was revising that reading now. He did not think they had been frightened. He thought they had been telling him something specific, in the flattest, most direct terms available. Come and try, not we will fight you, not you cannot beat us, not we are not afraid. Come and try. Come here specifically and try this specifically and see what happens. An invitation. Dorath looked out the viewport at the blue and white planet turning slowly below him and felt, for the first time in 12 campaigns, a thing he did not have a name for. It was not fear, he told himself that firmly. It was just that the situation was requiring a recalibration. He began the recalibration. Below him, in 3 cities on 3 continents, 12,000 of his soldiers were learning something that had not been in any of the pre-campaign briefings, something that the intelligence file had been too thin to contain, something that you could only learn the way the Velthari soldiers were learning it right now. The hard way. In the dark of a city that had decided, without a meeting or a vote or a coordinated announcement, to become a weapon. On the 4th day, Dorath stopped sleeping. It was not a decision he made consciously. He simply stopped leaving the command room. His crew brought him food, which he ate without tasting. He drank the Velthari equivalent of strong coffee in quantities his physician would have objected to. He watched the data come in from 3 combat sites on the planet below, and he tried to find the point where the numbers were supposed to start going in the other direction. They were not going in the other direction. 119 Velthari soldiers were dead. 241 were wounded, of whom 63 had wounds severe enough to require evacuation from the combat zone. His ground forces were holding their landing zones and the immediate surrounding area, but any attempt to advance deeper into the urban centers cost significant casualties and gained minimal ground. The humans gave up every block slowly, and they made the Velthari pay for each one, and then they came back at night. Night was proving to be a particular problem. Velthari soldiers had good low-light optical equipment, better than anything the humans had technically, but the humans had something the sensors could not fully account for. They knew their city in complete darkness. They had grown up in these streets. They knew every alley, every basement connection, every way in and out of every building. The city was a body they inhabited, and in the dark they moved through it like blood through veins, silent and purposeful and everywhere. On the morning of the 4th day, a patrol of 8 Velthari soldiers in the North American site entered a block they had cleared the previous evening, and simply did not return. No transmissions. No weapon discharge detected. No distress signal. 8 soldiers in full armor with active communications, gone in a block of buildings that had been confirmed clear 12 hours earlier. When Doreth sent a recovery team, they found the soldiers. They had been disabled. How? The forensic analysis was still working out and moved to a location 4 blocks from where they had disappeared. They were alive, stripped of their weapons. Stripped of their weapons. Doreth read that last part twice. Then he put the report down and stood very still for 30 seconds, which was something his crew had never seen him do before. They were taking the weapons. They were studying them. In real time under combat conditions, they were capturing Velthari technology and taking it apart to understand it. He called an emergency briefing of all his senior staff. The briefing room was quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when everyone present has read the same information and arrived at the same uncertain conclusion, but is waiting to see who says it first. Doreth said it first. It was his job. "We have a problem," he said. "Not a tactical problem, a conceptual problem. We came into this campaign with a model of what this species was, and the model is wrong. I need to understand how it's wrong so we can correct our approach." He brought up the human casualty estimates on the room's main display. The numbers were in the hundreds of thousands. The orbital strikes had been precise but not bloodless, and the ground fighting in 3 major urban centers had been going on for 4 days. The scale of human losses was enormous by any standard. "They are losing significantly more than we are," he said. "Their military casualties are high. Their civilian casualties, because the distinction is increasingly academic, are substantial, and they are not stopping." The room waited. "I want to understand that, not the tactical mechanics of how they fight. I already understand that well enough to be worried. I want to understand the psychological and cultural basis for the behavior. Why is a species that cannot win this fight still fighting it?" He looked at his intelligence lead. "Rikath, you've had 4 days. What have you found?" Intelligence officer Rikath was old and dry and precise, the kind of person who presented bad news without apologizing for it. He stood and pulled up his compiled report. "I've been going through the full historical database," he said. "Everything we've captured from their broadcasts and communication networks over the last several decades. Military history, cultural records, political history. I'll give you the short version first and then the details." "Please." Rikath looked at the room. "This species has been continuously at war with itself for 10,000 years, not intermittently, continuously. In that entire recorded period, there has not been a single year in which no organized armed conflict was occurring somewhere on the planet." The room took this in. "Furthermore," Rikath continued, "they have fought in every possible terrain type on the planet: Arctic conditions, tropical jungle, open desert, high-altitude mountain environments, urban centers of massive complexity, underground, underwater, and for the last 70 years the near-orbital environment as well. They have developed specialized tactical doctrines for each of these environments. They have standing militaries trained specifically for Arctic warfare, specifically for jungle warfare, specifically for desert warfare, specifically for urban combat. It is not an exaggeration to say that warfighting is one of the things this species is most experienced at across its entire history." "How experienced?" Doreth said. Rikath pulled up a number. "Their documented major military conflicts, what they define as a conflict involving more than 10,000 casualties, number in the hundreds. Their undocumented smaller conflicts number in the thousands. They have fought with spears, with swords, with fire, with gunpowder, with poison gas, with aircraft, with armored vehicles, with submarines, with ballistic missiles, and with nuclear weapons. They developed nuclear weapons and then used them in actual combat. Twice. And then they didn't use them on each other again for 80 years, despite possessing them in enormous quantities, because they understood the consequences of doing so. That last part landed differently than the rest. They showed restraint, Dorothy said slowly. A species with sufficient weapons to destroy itself showed restraint. For 80 years, yes. Not because they lacked the capability. Not because they lacked the will to use them against each other. They came extremely close. Multiple times. But because they performed the calculation, understood the outcome, and chose not to. Rikath paused. This is not a species that is incapable of self-control. It is a species that directs its aggression with considerable precision when it chooses to. The room was very quiet. There is one more thing, Rikath said. His tone had not changed, but something in his face had. In the last 4 days, since the ground invasion began, I have been monitoring their communication networks. Their global political situation prior to our arrival was fractured. Multiple major powers in open diplomatic conflict, historical enemies, nations that have been in a state of military tension with each other for decades. I'm aware of that, Dorothy said. It was part of the reason we expected the conquest to be straightforward. Yes, Rikath pulled up a communications intercept on the display. This is a transmission from 4 days ago, the day our ground forces landed. It is a conversation between a senior military commander in the nation called Russia and his counterpart in the nation called the United States of America. These two nations have been pointing nuclear weapons at each other for 70 years. They have fought proxy wars against each other on multiple continents. They have, in the opinion of several human historians whose work I have read, come closer to mutual destruction than any two other entities in their recorded history. He let that sit for a moment. In this conversation, the Russian commander calls the American admiral by his first name. They spend 4 minutes coordinating troop movement data and then another 6 minutes discussing the most effective way to distribute human munitions across 3 combat zones. Rikath looked up. Then the Russian says, and I quote the translation, "Whatever else, brother, we deal with this first." And the American says, "Agreed." And they return to the tactical coordination. The room sat with this. Dorothy thought about what it meant. Nations that had been each other's most dangerous enemies, that had spent 70 years on the edge of mutual annihilation, dropping that conflict instantly, without negotiation, without a peace agreement, without anything except a shared threat and 4 days of time. How many similar coalitions have formed? He asked. All of them, Rikath said simply. Every major military power on the planet is now sharing tactical data and coordinating responses. Nations that have been in active armed conflict with each other as recently as 3 years ago are cooperating. Nations that have not had diplomatic contact in decades are on the same communication channels. He closed his display. They are unifying, not under a single government, not yet. But operationally in the field at the command level, they are functioning as a single military force. It took them 4 days. Dorothy stood up from his chair and walked to the viewport. Below him, clouds moved slowly over the blue planet. From up here it looked peaceful. From up here it looked like what the file had said it was, a small, young, divided world with limited technology and enormous internal tensions. The file was not wrong, exactly. It just had not understood what any of those things meant in practice. Divided did not mean permanently divided. Limited technology did not mean limited capability. Young did not mean inexperienced at the things that mattered. He sent the message to High Commander Vrail that had been forming in his mind for 2 days. Sir, I need to revise my initial assessment significantly. I believe we have encountered a species that our standard conquest model does not apply to. They are not breaking under pressure. They are consolidating. Historical enemy nations are forming operational coalitions within days of the invasion beginning. Their military culture includes extensive doctrine for exactly this scenario, fighting a technologically superior invader using urban and asymmetric methods. I am not certain that a ground campaign will produce a surrender. I am requesting authorization to escalate orbital strikes, and I am requesting that the intelligence basis for this campaign be reviewed urgently. There is something about this species that is not in the file." He sent it. He did not feel certain that Vrail would receive it in time to matter. 2 days later, a ship appeared at the edge of the solar system. It was not a Velthari ship. It was a vessel belonging to a species called the Meneth, old traders mostly, who moved through this region of the galaxy in long-haul commerce routes. They were not a warlike species. They were not allies of the Velthari, but they were not enemies either. They were, in the Velthari Empire's view, largely irrelevant. The Meneth ship broadcast on the open Velthari military frequency, in clean, precise Velthari language. Doreth took the call himself. The Meneth who spoke was old, ancient even by the look of them, with the particular stillness of someone who had lived long enough to have stopped being surprised by most things. But they were not still now. Their eyes were moving, and their voice had a quality in it that Doreth, in 4 campaigns, had never heard from a Meneth. "Veer, Fleet Commander," the Meneth said, "I need you to hear what I am about to say and take it seriously. We passed through this system on a route we have traveled for 200 years. We saw the marker beacons in the outer system, and we knew immediately what you were doing here. We turned our ship around and we came back at maximum speed to tell you one thing." "Tell me," Doreth said. "Leave now, take your ships and go. Do not negotiate, do not try to consolidate your position, do not wait for more reinforcements, just leave." Doreth looked at the old Meneth on his screen. "We have a planetary conquest operation underway. I cannot simply—" "You don't understand what those marker beacons are for," the Meneth said. Their voice was flat and absolutely serious. "They are not navigation warnings. They were placed by the Veil 3,000 years ago. The Veil surveyed this solar system and they found those humans and they placed the beacons to tell every spacefaring species that came after them. Do not contact, do not interfere, do not antagonize." Doreth felt something cold move through him. The Veil were ancient. Pre-Velthari, pre-Meneth, pre-almost everything. They were gone now, vanished thousands of years ago for reasons that were still debated. But they had been, by every account, the most capable species the galaxy had ever produced. The idea that they had surveyed Earth and specifically marked it as a warning. "Why?" he said. The Meneth's eyes did not move from his. Because the Veil ran the projections. They looked at what those creatures were, what they were doing, what they would become, and they determined that any species that interfered with their development before they reached a certain point of maturity would find themselves in a conflict they could not win. A pause. 3 different species tried before the beacons were placed, before the warning. The Veil documented what happened to them. "What happened to them?" Doreth said. "They don't exist anymore," the Meneth said. "The humans didn't just defeat them, they absorbed them. They took everything those species had, their technology, their tactics, their weapons, and they integrated it and they came back. And when they came back, they were not the same species that had been invaded. They were something more." The old Meneth leaned forward slightly. "The beacons say, this species is still growing. They are still becoming whatever they will eventually be. To invade them now is to teach them things they are not supposed to learn yet. And the species that taught them those lessons did not survive the education." The line was quiet for a moment. "Leave," the Meneth said again. "I am telling you this because I have traded along this route for 60 years and I have no interest in watching another species make this mistake. Leave now, while you still can, while the lesson is small." Doreth stared at the screen for a long time after the transmission ended. Then he looked at the latest casualty report on his secondary display. 283 dead. The number was still going up. He thought about what Vrail had said. 200 ships is more than sufficient. If it takes more than that, something has gone wrong with your planning. He thought about the 3 words on his display 4 days ago. "Come and try." He looked at the planet below, still blue, still turning. still from this distance looking like the easy conquest in a thin file. He opened a channel to his ground commanders. "Pull back your forward positions to the landing zones," he said. "I'm reassessing the operation." Seville appeared at his elbow. "Commander." "Pull them back," Dorath said again, "and get me everything we have on human weapons development programs. Everything, not the summary, the full data." Seville looked at him for a moment, then he went to do it. Dorath turned back to the viewport and the planet below, and for the first time since the campaign began, he allowed himself to think the thought he had been pushing aside for 4 days. They were not breaking. They were not going to break. And below him, in 100 underground facilities and converted manufacturing plants and university research departments, 8 billion people who had been fighting each other for 10,000 years had just found something they could all agree on. He had no idea yet what that was going to produce. He was about to find out. The first missile came from a silo in the middle of nowhere. Dorath's sensor crew detected the launch at T-40 seconds. Standard Velthari orbital sensor packages could detect a large ballistic missile launch from the planet's surface with ease. It was, in fact, one of the details that had made the initial intelligence assessment so comfortable. Yes, the humans had nuclear weapons. Yes, they had ballistic missiles. But the missiles were designed to travel in a shallow arc from one point on the surface to another point on the surface. They were not space weapons. Their trajectory would carry them through the upper atmosphere and back down again. They could not reach a Velthari ship in stable high orbit. Everyone on the bridge knew this. It was in the briefing materials. It had been verified multiple times. So when the sensor operator reported the launch, there was a moment, just a moment of professional routine before she looked again at the trajectory data, and her voice changed. "Commander, that is not a surface-to-surface trajectory." Dorath was at her console in 4 steps. He looked at the data himself. The missile was climbing, not arcing, climbing. Its second-stage burn was different from any human ballistic missile in the Velthari database, longer, more powerful, sustaining thrust well past the point where a standard ICBM would have cut engines and begun its downward arc. Someone had modified the guidance system and added a third stage that the standard human ballistic missile did not have. "It's targeting us," the sensor operator said, in a voice that was trying very hard to be calm. "Intercept," Dorath said. The Velthari point defense systems were fast. They were designed to handle exactly this kind of threat, and they handled it. The incoming missile was destroyed at a range of approximately 40 kilometers from the steadfast reach, producing a bright, hard flash that was visible from the planet's surface. Then the second alert came in. And the third. 14 simultaneous launches from 6 different countries. Not identical missiles, each had been modified differently, by different teams, using different available materials and engineering approaches. Some of the modifications were crude. Some were clever. All of them showed the same basic insight, that a ballistic missile with a modified third stage and updated guidance package could, in theory, reach a Velthari ship in high orbit. In theory, 7 of them were correct. Dorath's point defense systems handled the incoming fire, but it cost something. It cost time. It cost the crew's attention. It cost the certainty that the engagement space above the planet was exclusively his. It also cost one ship. The Asterisk Persistent Victory Asterisk, a mid-size escort cruiser positioned at a slightly lower orbital altitude than the rest of the fleet, took a direct hit from a modified missile before its point defense batteries could reacquire and respond. The warhead was nuclear. The yield was, by Velthari standards, modest. But a nuclear detonation at close proximity to a warship was a nuclear detonation at close proximity to a warship, and the Asterisk Persistent Victory rolled out of formation with a destroyed sensor array, a breached forward section, and 37 casualties. One ship damaged, not destroyed, but damaged. By a species with no orbital weapons. By a species that had taken the orbital weapons problem, sat with it for approximately 1 week, and engineered a partial solution from the technology they already had lying in missile silos across their planet. Dorath stood in the center of his bridge and processed this. "Recall the ground forces," he said. His voice was completely steady. "All of them, all 3 sites, execute emergency extraction, now." "Commander, the ground forces are in contact," Seville started. "I know they are in contact. Execute the extraction anyway. We pull them out under fire if we have to, but we pull them out." He turned to his communications officer. "Get me a full fleet channel." The channel opened. "All ships, adjust orbital altitude to maximum safe range from surface. Point defense systems to full active status. I want missile tracking on every launch site we have data on, and I want predictive targeting on any site we don't." He paused. "They've modified their surface-to-surface missiles for orbital engagement. We don't know how many they have that are modified and how many are not. Treat every launch as a potential orbital threat until proven otherwise." He closed the channel. Seville was standing at his side, not speaking, which was how Seville communicated that he had something to say and was waiting for the right moment. "Say it," Dorath told him. "We are at day 9, Seville said carefully. "Our original projection was 30 days for full submission. We are at day 9 and we are pulling our ground forces back." "I know where we are." "The High Commander will ask." "I know what the High Commander will ask. I'll answer it when he asks it." Dorath turned back to the tactical display. "Right now, I need to know what else they are going to do that is not in the database." What else they were going to do that was not in the database turned out to be the question that kept him occupied for the next 72 hours, during which he did not sleep at all, even by the relaxed definition he had been operating on since day 4. The extraction of the ground forces was not clean. At all 3 sites, the Velthari landing craft came under sustained fire during the withdrawal. The humans had clearly anticipated or planned for the possibility of a ground force extraction and had positioned assets to make it as costly as possible. Anti-air systems that had not been active for the first week of the operation came online during the extraction window. 3 landing craft were damaged. 1 was destroyed before it cleared the atmosphere, killing the crew and the 40 soldiers aboard. It was not a rout. Dorath was precise about this in his own mind. It was a costly tactical withdrawal, not a rout. But his soldiers were coming back with captured Velthari equipment in human hands, still visible on the cameras, as the landing craft lifted off. And the humans on the ground were cheering. He could hear it faintly on the open frequency his crew used to monitor human communications. Millions of voices on 3 different continents, in 3 different languages, all producing the same sound. They were cheering because they thought they had won something. Dorath, looking at his casualty numbers, thought they might be right. He had his fleet at high orbital altitude and his ground forces recovered. He was still operating from a position of overwhelming superiority, 200 ships, versus a planet with no space combat capability except those modified missiles. He could still win this. He ran the numbers continuously, looking for the clean path to victory that he knew should exist. The path kept getting complicated. Modified missiles were part of it. In the 10 days since the invasion began, the humans had not merely built the modified missiles they had already launched. They had built more. His sensor sweeps of the planet's surface showed increased activity at manufacturing facilities, at research institutions, at military bases. They were building things, modifying things, working at a pace that his analysts described with some difficulty as simply incomprehensible given the scale of what they were attempting. "How are they doing this?" he asked Verath during one of the briefings. "Their industrial capacity is significant but not extraordinary. The engineering challenges involved in modifying a ballistic missile for orbital engagement are substantial. Even with existing knowledge of the basic principles, the practical implementation. They are sharing data, Verath said, across every national boundary they have. Every engineering team working on the problem is transmitting its results to every other engineering team on the planet in real time. They are effectively running a planetary-scale research collaboration with no coordination lag. She paused. Also, and this is the part that I find difficult to present without it sounding alarming, they have the Velthari weapons. Doreth looked at her. The weapons captured from our soldiers on the ground, she said. There are approximately 400 Velthari personal and squad-level weapons currently in human possession. They have had them for between 3 and 9 days depending on when each was captured. She pulled up the relevant data. Our energy weapon technology is significantly more advanced than their own. In theory, it should take months to reverse engineer, even for a technically sophisticated species. She looked at him steadily. They have been broadcasting partial technical analyses of our weapons on open research networks for the last 4 days. They have shared their initial findings with every research institution on the planet. They are working on reverse engineering our weapons the same way they are working on modifying their missiles. They're not going to get anywhere in 9 days, Seville said. He sounded like he was hoping this was true. Probably not, Verath agreed. But in 30 days, 60, she closed her display. I cannot give you a confident projection for how long it takes them to produce a functional copy of a Velthari energy weapon. I don't have a baseline for this species. I can only tell you that the rate at which they are sharing and synthesizing data is faster than anything in our records. Doreth looked at the planet below. He thought about what the old Menath trader had said. They absorbed them. They took everything those species had, their technology, their tactics, their weapons, and they integrated it. He had assumed this was an exaggeration, the hyperbole of a frightened species, an old story told to make monsters bigger than they were. He was reassessing that assumption with some urgency. On day 12, the humans did something that removed any remaining ambiguity about the direction of the conflict. They launched people at his ships. Not missiles, not weapons, people. 3 repurposed orbital vehicles, stripped of all unnecessary mass, packed with compressed reaction fuel, and aimed at 3 different Velthari ships at the edge of the fleet's formation. The vehicles had no weapons. They were moving at extreme velocity on a direct intercept course. The Velthari point defense systems classified them as missiles and targeted them accordingly. 2 were destroyed before they reached their targets. The third was not. It docked violently, imprecisely, but functionally, against the hull of the escort vessel * Quiet Authority. The airlock cut through by methods that the crew of the * Quiet Authority were not immediately able to classify. And then there were human soldiers inside a Velthari warship. What followed was 6 hours of the most chaotic internal security engagement that Doreth had ever seen reported in a field action. The humans numbered 23. The * Quiet Authority had a crew of 480. The humans were smaller, had inferior personal weapons, and had no knowledge of the ship's layout. They took 22 hours to subdue, not 6. They took the ship's communication array apart as they went. They did not destroy it. They documented it. They took images and recordings of every system they could reach: propulsion, navigation, weapons, communications, transmitted the data back to the surface. And then, when their ammunition was exhausted and their position was fully surrounded, surrendered with what the * Quiet Authority *S commander described, in his incident report, as an air of complete satisfaction. 23 humans, in a foreign warship, with no knowledge of the layout, against 480 crew. 22 hours. And when it was over, somewhere on the planet below, 10,000 engineers had new data to work with. Doreth read the * Quiet Authority incident report and set it down very carefully on his console. He wrote his message to Vrail. It was the most difficult communication he had ever sent in his career, because it required him to say a thing he had not said in 12 campaigns. He wrote it plainly, without trying to soften it, because Vrail had no patience for softening. High Commander, I need to give you an honest assessment. We are not losing, but we are no longer winning. The humans are not behaving as a species under conquest. They are behaving as a species under education. Every engagement is teaching them something they retain and apply to the next engagement. They have modified their ballistic missiles for orbital targeting. They are actively reverse engineering our weapons technology on a planetary scale. They have executed a successful boarding action against one of our vessels and extracted technical data before being contained. The casualty ratio remains in our favor, but the trend line is moving against us, and it is moving faster than I can account for. He paused with his fingers over the keypad. Then he added one more line. I believe the Meneth trader was correct. I believe we need to reconsider the strategic basis of this operation. He sent it. Then he looked at the tactical display, at 200 ships arranged in high orbit over a planet that should have surrendered 2 weeks ago. Below him, a species that had been fighting for 10,000 years had been at war with an interstellar empire for 12 days. In those 12 days, they had forced a ground force withdrawal, damaged one of his ships with improvised orbital weapons, seized technical data from a second, and were currently manufacturing modified weapons at a speed his projections could not comfortably contain. They were learning. Every day they were learning. He thought about the Meneth's words one more time. To invade them now is to teach them things they are not supposed to learn yet. He looked at the orbital mechanics display, at the vector calculations, at the fleet positions. He thought about what it would mean to order a full withdrawal and go back to Vrail with no conquest, no territory, nothing but a thin file and a 12-day operation that had cost over 300 soldiers and 1 damaged ship. He thought about what it would mean to stay. He was still thinking about it when the new alert came in. His sensor officer's voice was controlled, precise, and had the quality in it that experienced officers develop specifically for delivering information that is worse than expected. Commander, we are detecting energy weapon discharge from the planet's surface, multiple sites. Doreth's head came up. Human energy weapons, his science officer confirmed a moment later, her voice carrying the same careful quality. Not identical to Velthari spec, but the basic emission profile is consistent with our technology. They have functional prototypes. 12 days. In 12 days, from zero knowledge of Velthari technology, with 23 soldiers' worth of stolen data and the partial documentation from the Asterisk Quiet Authority boarding, 12 days. Doreth stared at his display. 12 days. He picked up the command channel. It was time to make a decision. Vrail's response came in on day 14. It arrived as a text communication, which was unusual. Vrail typically used video for command-level messages. The fact that he used text told Doreth something about the content before he read a single word. It said, "Hold your position. Do not withdraw. The political cost of withdrawing from an active conquest operation is unacceptable at this time. Continue orbital pressure. Neutralize their weapons development capacity from orbit if necessary. You have authority to expand target parameters." Doreth read it. He read it again. Expand target parameters meant civilian targets, industrial centers, power grids, the infrastructure that was feeding the weapons development effort, which was, at this point, woven throughout the civilian population so thoroughly that there was no clean way to hit one without hitting the other. Vrail was not saying this directly. He did not need to. The phrasing was precise enough that a career officer could understand it without having it spelled out. Doreth sat with the message for a long time. He thought about the 12 campaigns, The clean mathematics of superior force meeting inferior resistance. The species that broke always because the math was real and the math was always in the Velthari's favor. He had been proud of those campaigns. Not in a showy way, not the way young officers were proud loudly for other people to notice, but quietly proud the way you are proud of work that is done correctly, efficient, professional, without unnecessary cruelty. He thought about expanding target parameters over a planet of 8 billion people. Then he set Vrail's message aside and pulled up the tactical display. Because the decision had actually been made already, somewhere in the last 14 days, and all that remained was to act on it. The humans launched their counterattack on the morning of day 15. Not a single action, not one decisive strike from one direction. A coordinated, simultaneous operation across every axis available to them, timed and organized with a precision that Doreth had not believed possible for a species 14 days into its first interstellar conflict. It began in orbit. 47 modified ballistic missiles launched in a precisely timed wave, designed specifically to overwhelm the point defense systems of 3 ships simultaneously. Not to destroy the ships, to hold their point defense systems busy. While the point defense systems were busy, 3 more orbital vehicles launched from separate locations on the surface, not aimed at ships with active point defense, aimed at ships that were occupied dealing with the missile wave. 2 of the vehicles reached their targets. The boarders who came out of them were different from the first group, better equipped, moving with a confidence and tactical discipline that 23 people crashing into an unknown warship had not shown. The data from the Asterisk Quiet Authority boarding had been used. The ship layout, the crew procedures, the internal security protocols, all of it had been studied and planned against. These teams moved through the ships they boarded with purpose. They were not trying to take the ships, they were trying to take the engines. Doreth understood this about 40 minutes into the engagement, when one of his engineering officers reported that the boarding team on the Asterisk Iron Patience had reached the engine room and was actively working on the primary drive systems. They were not destroying the engines. They were documenting them, recording everything. In the middle of an active boarding engagement, with Velthari security forces converging on their position, the human boarding team had split, half holding security off while the other half worked with extraordinary calm, transmitting data in compressed bursts to the planet's surface. They got 17 minutes in the engine room before they were overwhelmed. 17 minutes was enough for 700 researchers on the surface to start working on drive system analysis. That was not the worst part of day 15. The worst part came from the ground. The human energy weapons were crude. Doreth had reviewed the analysis. They were not copies of Velthari weapons. They were translations of the principle into materials and manufacturing processes the humans had available. The yield was lower. The range was significantly shorter. The rate of fire was inconsistent. But they worked. And the humans had built several thousand of them in 12 days, distributed them through a network of manufacturing facilities and volunteer groups, and put them in the hands of every military unit on the planet that could use them. For the first time since the invasion began, human soldiers on the ground had weapons that could damage Velthari armor at practical combat ranges. The 3 former landing zones, which Doreth's ground forces had evacuated 9 days earlier, had been rebuilt by the humans into fortified positions during that time, not because they expected the Velthari to land there again, because they expected to use them as launch platforms for something else. At exactly the same moment the orbital boarding operations began, every anti-air system the humans had pointed upward, every modified missile still in the inventory launched, every energy weapon that could reach low orbit fired. It was not a coordinated strike in the Velthari sense. It was not clean, not fully synchronized, not optimally targeted. It was every human military asset on the planet doing something aggressive toward the ships above them at the same time. A wall of fire going up with no perfect plan behind it, except the plan to make Dorath's fleet pay attention to everything simultaneously. And it worked, because Dorath's fleet could not be everywhere at once. The ship Dauntless Measure took 2 near-simultaneous nuclear missile impacts in a focused salvo aimed specifically at its lower sensor array. The array was destroyed. The ship was blind below it and had to reposition, breaking formation. The gap in the formation lasted 11 seconds. In those 11 seconds, a coordinated swarm of everything the humans could put in the air passed through it. Conventional aircraft loaded with every bomb in their inventory, aimed at the underbelly of the nearest ship to the formation gap. The aircraft did not survive. They never made it back to the surface. The ship they hit survived, barely. Dorath looked at his damage reports and made the decision. All ships, formation Alpha 3, we are withdrawing to safe range. His voice was steady. Signal the Dauntless Measure to hold position until it can regroup and we will form up around it. Seville looked at him. I know, Dorath said. Signal High Commander Vrail. Tell him I am executing a tactical repositioning. He will not. Tell him. The repositioning bought time. It did not change the situation. Over the following 6 days, the humans did not stop. They worked with the driven, exhausted, relentless energy of a species that had decided, somewhere in the first week of the invasion, that sleeping was something to do after. The data from the engine room of the Iron patients produced the first functional prototype of a drive system based on Velthari principles, built by humans from human materials, in 4 days. It was inefficient, and had a power consumption problem that its builders had not fully solved, but it ran. They put it on a test vehicle and launched it into orbit, where it functioned for 6 hours before the power system failed. 6 hours. On day 20, Vrail arrived. He came in his command ship, the Dominion's Hand with 15 additional warships, and his communication to Dorath was brief and direct. I am taking personal command of this operation. Present your full situation report. Dorath presented his full situation report. He presented it without edits, without framing, without any attempt to make the numbers look better than they were. 394 Velthari soldiers dead, 2 ships significantly damaged, 1 ship that had been partially boarded twice, a ground operation that had been completely withdrawn, a species that had gone from 0 orbital capability to functional, if crude, prototype FTL drive in 20 days. A planet now armed with several thousand energy weapons of Velthari design. Vrail listened to the entire report without speaking. Then he said, "Show me the weapons development projections." Dorath showed him the weapons development projections. They were not comforting projections. Vrail looked at them for a long time. He was old, over 400 years old, with 41 conquered worlds and a career built on the precision application of overwhelming force. He had fought wars that spanned decades in species that had resisted far longer than the humans had. He was not easily moved. But Dorath, who had served under him for 30 years, recognized what was on his face now. It was not fear. It was something colder and more analytical than fear. It was the expression of a commander looking at a projected timeline and doing math that did not end well. If we expand target parameters, Vrail said, if we hit the civilian infrastructure feeding this weapons development, the research networks, the manufacturing base. We would slow it, Dorath said. We would not stop it. They have distributed the work across thousands of facilities on 6 continents. There is no central node to destroy. To meaningfully degrade the effort, we would need to hit cities, hundreds of cities, and they have several thousand energy weapons on the ground now that can engage our ships at the altitude required for precision strikes. We would take casualties. Yes, How many? Doreth looked at his projections. I don't know, that's the honest answer. I don't have a confident projection for this species at this point. The variables are too many. He paused. What I can tell you is that at current rate of development, they will have functional orbital energy weapons within 40 days. Within 90 days, they will have something approaching drive technology. Within 6 months, I cannot rule out that they will be capable of following us. Vrail was quiet for a very long time. On the display between them, the blue planet turned in the dark. Below its clouds, something was building, something that had not existed 20 days ago. The Meneth trader was correct, Vrail said finally, not a question. Yes, sir. We taught them. Yes. Vrail stood up. He walked to the viewport. And he stood there the way old men stand when they are making a decision they know they will not be able to take back. Order the full withdrawal, he said. All ships, we leave this system. Sir. We leave. His voice was flat, final. And we tell no one what happened here. This operation does not get recorded in the conquest ledger. It does not become doctrine. It does not get studied. He turned. Do you understand me? I understand you. Doreth gave the orders. The Velthari fleet left the solar system on day 22. They did not announce their departure. They simply went 200 ships plus Vrail's 15, pulling out of high orbit and accelerating toward the jump point at the edge of the system. By the time the humans' tracking systems confirmed the movement was a withdrawal and not a repositioning, the fleet was already beyond the outer planets. On the planet below, it took approximately 4 hours for the confirmation to spread, then approximately 4 minutes for the sound to start. There were many different languages in it, many different words for the same thing. The underlying sound was the same across all of them. 3 days after the withdrawal, a signal was broadcast from Earth. Not on the radio frequencies the humans used for their own communications, on the frequency that the Velthari fleet had used for its conquest broadcast 3 weeks earlier, the one that had been used to say, "Your world has been selected. Surrender within 12 hours." The signal reached the Meneth trader's ship first. The Meneth listened to it, and the old trader who had made the frantic call to Doreth sat very still for a long time after it finished. Then they transmitted it on, because a signal like that deserved to be heard. It reached 6 more species before the Velthari received it. All 6 of them went quiet in the way that a room goes quiet when someone says something that changes how everyone understands the situation. The signal said, "We know what those marker beacons were for. We found them years ago. We know who placed them and why. We are aware that other species have been watching us, deciding whether to make contact or to wait. We are aware that some of you have been afraid of what we might become. You were not wrong to be afraid, but you were afraid of the wrong thing. We are not a threat to any species that leaves us alone. We are not interested in conquest. We are not looking for war with anyone who is not looking for war with us. Our history of fighting each other is exactly that, our history. What we have learned from 10,000 years of it is not how to destroy things. It is how to refuse to be destroyed. To the Velthari Empire, you came here to teach us our place in the galaxy. You have taught us something, but it was not what you intended. We have your weapons now. We have your engine schematics. We have the beginning of your navigation technology. We did not ask for any of it. You brought it here. To everyone else who is listening, we are humans. We live on the 3rd planet of this system. We are not asking to be left alone anymore. We are ready to be part of whatever the galaxy is. But the first lesson, for anyone who needs it: we do not surrender. High Commander Vrail received the signal aboard the Asterisk Dominion's Hand Asterisk, 3 days out from the human solar system. He listened to it in his private cabin, alone, with the recording played twice so he could be certain he had understood it correctly. Then he sat for a long time. He thought about the 41 worlds in the Empire's ledger, the clean, efficient operations, the species that broke because the math was real. He thought about the marker beacons, placed 3,000 years ago by a species that had looked at Earth and understood something that the Velthari had not thought to ask about. He thought about 3 words received on day 1, broadcast from every transmitter on the planet simultaneously, in every language they had. Come and try. He had thought it was bravado. He understood now that it was simply an accurate description of the situation. Come, try, and see what the trying produces. 41 worlds, no losses, no surprises, no campaign that required a rethinking of the model. The 42nd was different. He pulled up the recording one more time. He listened to it all the way through. Then he composed a communication to the full High Command, not just the military council but the full governing body, every member, marked urgent. It said, "I need to brief the full council on the Earth operation. There are things we need to understand about this species before any further contact is attempted. What we encountered is not in our doctrine, our history, or our models. It needs to be." He sent it. He closed his displays. He sat in the dark of his cabin with the stars moving past the small viewport. Somewhere behind him, growing smaller with every hour, the third planet of a quiet solar system was lit from within. Cities in the dark, billions of people who had just spent 22 days inventing orbital weapons, boarding enemy warships, and reverse engineering faster-than-light drive technology from stolen data, and who were now, probably, already arguing about what to do next. That was the part that had not been in the file. Not the fighting, not the refusal to surrender, not the tactical creativity or the speed of adaptation or the terrifying capacity for coalitions that formed in hours from centuries of enemies. It was this: when it was over, they would not stop. They never stopped. They would take everything they had learned in 22 days of war, and they would build on it, and they would argue about it, and they would improve it, and then they would reach out into the galaxy. Not to conquer, not because they were cruel, but because they were exactly what the marker beacons had warned about. A species still growing, still becoming, and now awake and looking up, and knowing the galaxy was there. Vrail sat in the dark for a long time. The stars did not answer him. They never did.